What if one of the most powerful and misunderstood figures in history wasn't just a king, but someone who held the keys to shaping reality itself? Solomon is a name that echoes through time. You might have heard of him as a wise ruler from ancient scriptures, a builder of temples, or a man of unmatched wealth and power. But there's another side to his story, one that goes far beyond the usual tales of kingship and religion. Beneath the surface of history lies something far more mysterious and complex. Because according to many traditions, Solomon didn't just rule a nation. He understood how the universe worked at its deepest levels. He was said to possess knowledge that bridged the gap between the seen and the unseen. His wisdom wasn't just about making good decisions. It was about understanding hidden forces, mastering sacred names, and using them to bring order to the world. Many ancient stories claim Solomon had access to powerful knowledge that let him interact with invisible energies. These weren't just spiritual ideas. They were seen as real forces that shaped life itself. He was said to know the secret names of God, 72 of them, each holding a unique vibration and power. Knowing these names meant knowing the very structure of reality. These names weren't spoken out loud, because to speak them was to activate them. It was believed that if you could understand them and use them properly, you could influence the world on a deep, invisible level. Solomon's ring plays a big role in these stories. It wasn't just a symbol of power. It was a tool said to hold those sacred names. The ring allowed him to command spiritual forces, not just angels, but other beings. Some called them demons. Others called them spirits or energies. These weren't treated as evil in the way modern people often think of them. Instead, they were seen as powerful, raw forces that needed to be understood and guided. Solomon didn't try to destroy these beings. He asked them questions. He wanted to know what they were, what they did, and how they operated. His goal wasn't to get rid of chaos, but to study it, learn from it, and turn it into something useful. One of the most fascinating parts of his story is the temple he built. Most people know it as a religious structure, but in many mystical teachings, the temple was much more than that. It was designed with exact measurements and shapes that held symbolic meaning. The most sacred room, the Holy of Holies, was a perfect cube, a shape representing balance and order. This wasn't just architecture. It was a way of bringing harmony into the physical world using the deeper rules of creation. According to Jewish mystical thought, the entire universe was created through 22 Hebrew letters, each with its own energy. Solomon's temple was believed to be built using those letters, not just in writing, but in structure. The idea was that Solomon didn't just build with stone. He was building with energy, symbols, and sacred knowledge. Even the objects inside the temple, the lampstands, the veils, the altar, were made with purpose. Each one represented a different aspect of creation or divine energy. Walking through the temple wasn't just a physical act. It was a spiritual journey, with each step symbolizing movement through different layers of existence. Other cultures had similar ideas. Ancient Egyptians believed temples were shaped like the bodies of gods. In India, mandalas were maps of the universe. In Europe, cathedrals were built with hidden mathematical codes. In all these places, buildings were made not just to stand, but to speak, to hold power, and to guide people to something greater. Solomon had helped building the temple. According to the Bible, A craftsman named Hiram came from the city of Tyre to assist. But Hiram wasn't just a builder. He was seen in mystical writings as someone with deep knowledge of metals, fire, and spiritual transformation. He represented the blending of physical skill and spiritual wisdom. Together, Solomon and Hiram created something that many believe wasn't just a temple, but a powerful symbol of how the universe works. There's one question that has fascinated scholars and seekers for centuries. Where did Solomon get the plans for the temple? The religious answer is that God gave them to him. But older, more mysterious texts say something different. One of them, called the Testament of Solomon, says he learned from both divine and dark forces. In this story, Solomon is given a ring by an angel, and with that ring, he commands beings that most people fear. These spirits help him build the temple, not by force, but through knowledge and cooperation. This part of the story shows that Solomon didn't reject uncomfortable truths. He faced them. He turned even the darkest forces into building blocks of something sacred. The 72 spirits that Solomon is said to have captured each had a different personality, role, and type of power. Some brought knowledge. Some caused confusion. Some helped people. Others misled them. But in many mystical traditions, they weren't seen as purely bad. They were treated as pieces of nature or the mind, parts of life that must be understood and guided. Some teachers say each of the 72 spirits is the shadow side of one of the 72 sacred names. This means that light and dark aren't separate. They're two sides of the same truth, and true mastery is about knowing both. This is why Solomon's story became a powerful symbol in groups like the Freemasons. In their teachings, the Temple of Solomon is more than a historical building. It's a symbol of inner transformation. Every part of it represents a lesson. The temple is rebuilt over and over in the hearts and minds of people who seek truth. The journey through the temple is a personal journey, one that requires patience, reflection, and courage. At the center of the temple is the Holy of Holies, a space that is completely empty. It held no idol, no object, no image. It was made to hold the unseen. That emptiness wasn't a lack. It was the presence of something too big, too deep, and too sacred to define. Solomon is remembered not just because he ruled a kingdom, but because of how he ruled his own mind and spirit. He understood that the real battle wasn't outside him. It was inside. The spirits he worked with weren't just magical beings. They represented fear, desire, anger, passion, wisdom, and confusion. They were parts of the human soul. Solomon brought them into order. He didn't erase them. He organized them, gave them purpose, and made them part of a larger plan. That's what real wisdom looks like. It's not about avoiding what's difficult. It's about learning from it and using it for something meaningful. This same message appears in many cultures. In Islam, Solomon, called Suleiman, is seen as a prophet who commanded the winds and the jinn, who could speak to animals, and who was so deeply respected that even after his death, no one knew he was gone until his staff broke. In Hindu and Gnostic traditions, there are similar ideas that spiritual growth comes not from avoiding darkness, but by mastering it. So when we talk about Solomon's ring, the 72 names, or the spirits he commanded, we're not just talking about magic. We're talking about symbols of knowledge, focus, and self-mastery. The names represent energy. The ring represents control. The spirits represent power. If you have only one, it doesn't work. But if you bring them all together, if you have knowledge, control, and power, you can create something lasting. You can build a world. You can build yourself. Solomon, then, becomes more than a figure in a book. He becomes a symbol of what it means to truly know yourself. His story is not about control over others, but mastery of the self. He didn't run from the unknown. He studied it. He didn't reject the dark. He transformed it. He didn't seek peace by avoiding struggle. He found peace by facing every part of existence and bringing it into harmony. And maybe that's why his name has lasted through the centuries. Not just because of what he ruled, but because of what he understood. When Solomon asked God for wisdom in the ancient Book of Kings, he was not asking for intelligence just to make good political decisions or to rule his people better. He was asking for something much deeper than clever thinking. He was asking for direct connection to the deepest kind of truth, the same wisdom that shaped the entire universe. In the original Hebrew language, the word used for wisdom was chokmah. That word does not mean normal knowledge or intelligence. It means something far more powerful and mysterious. It refers to the source of creation itself, the force that helped build the universe from nothing. It is the original understanding that existed before anything else was made. It is not information you learn from books or from reasoning. It is something that lives deep in the core of existence. This kind of wisdom is like pure energy. It gives life and structure to everything. But it is also powerful and dangerous, like fire. If you try to touch this wisdom too early or without being ready, it can burn you. That means it can overwhelm your mind and spirit. It is not something you can use lightly or control easily. In some ancient texts that were not included in the Bible, like the Wisdom of Solomon, this deep wisdom is described as something alive. It is not just a thing or a concept. It is described as a living presence. It is often shown as feminine, gentle, bright, loving, but also powerful and sometimes frightening. In those writings, Solomon says that this wisdom sits right next to God's throne, and that he loved her more than riches, power, or honor. That tells us something very important. This kind of wisdom is not just an ability or a skill you use. It is something you must love and surrender to completely. It takes over your life in a deep way. It changes you from the inside. Loving this kind of wisdom is like falling in love with something sacred. But it's not easy. It requires you to give up many things: comfort, control, and even certainty. And when you do receive this wisdom, it does not always bring peace. Sometimes it brings pain. Because when you truly understand how the world works, you also see its weakness, its sadness, and how temporary everything is. Solomon was given more wisdom than anyone around him. He understood the stars and how they moved. He understood how the human mind works. He knew the names of spiritual beings. He could speak the language of birds. In some old traditions, birds represent souls that have been freed from the body. So speaking their language meant Solomon understood deep spiritual truths. He could understand dreams, and he could understand silence. He even knew the secret name of God, which in some beliefs is the most powerful truth of all. But instead of giving him happiness, this knowledge brought him pain. It was simply too much for one person to carry. In the book of Ecclesiastes, which is often linked to Solomon, we see the effect this had on him. He does not appear as a joyful king. Instead, he appears as a tired man, someone who has seen too much. He says, "The more wisdom you have, the more sorrow you feel. The more knowledge, the more grief." This is not just a complaint. It is a truth about life. When you really see how the world works, when you see how everything changes, how people suffer, and how little control we have, it can make you feel deeply sad. This sadness does not mean wisdom is bad. It simply means that real understanding comes with emotional weight. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon describes life as something fleeting. He says everything is like vapor or mist, something that appears and disappears quickly and cannot be held in your hands. He looks at the world and sees the deeper structure behind it. He sees how everything is temporary and uncertain. He sees the patterns and systems behind people's actions. But instead of feeling proud, this makes him feel lost. Because he knows so much, he can no longer enjoy things in a simple way. A modern writer named Harold Bloom once said that Solomon may be the first character in literature who is shown to be divided inside. He is both in control and out of control. He is both wise and confused. He sees everything clearly, but he cannot enjoy life. His sharp mind becomes a burden. He cannot stop thinking, and his thoughts bring him no peace. This experience of knowing too much and feeling overwhelmed by it appears in many old spiritual texts. In one of them, it says that wisdom is like a tree that only grows when its roots are in emptiness. That means the highest form of wisdom is knowing that you do not really know anything. And Solomon seems to understand this. He becomes a symbol of someone who knows a great deal, but still feels incomplete. His personal life shows this too. Even though he spoke of staying true to wisdom, he ended up with hundreds of wives and concubines. He did not do this only for pleasure. He was searching for something that no number of women could give him. He wanted to fully understand the feminine part of the world, which is linked to creation, emotion, and mystery. Many of the women he married were from other cultures, and religious texts sometimes call them a danger. But in symbolic teachings, these women represent different parts of the soul. Solomon was trying to connect with every part of the human experience, but he could not fully succeed. This shows how complex and endless the search for truth really is. In Islamic teachings, Solomon, called Sulaiman, is known as a wise prophet, but it is said that his wisdom made him proud, and because of that pride, he temporarily lost his kingdom. A spirit took his form and ruled in his place. This story shows that even great wisdom can become dangerous if it leads to arrogance. In other mystical writings, Solomon is called the master of the middle gate. That means he walked between light and darkness, between good and evil. But he did not belong fully to either side. He passed through them and tried to balance them. That is not easy to do. When you walk through too many unknown places, you can forget who you are and lose your way. This is what makes Solomon such a powerful figure. He represents the seeker, the one who wants to understand everything. But that kind of path is risky. When you go too far in your search for truth, you can come close to breaking down. There is a fine line between deep insight and total confusion. People who walk that path must be strong enough to stay calm, even when nothing makes sense. A modern teacher named Osho once said that wisdom is like the sky. It allows all things to pass through it, but it does not become those things. In his best moments, Solomon was like that sky, peaceful, accepting, and strong. But other times, he got lost in the storm of his own thoughts. One of Solomon's most famous objects was his ring. In old stories, this ring had the power to control spirits. But more importantly, it symbolized control over the ego. Only someone who has mastered their own pride and fear can handle the kind of deep truth that comes from real wisdom. Only someone who is okay with silence can speak words that have true power. Solomon had the ability to speak to heaven, but he also heard the silence of the unknown. His wisdom was both his greatest gift and his heaviest burden. That is the truth of the journey toward wisdom. It is not a path of comfort. It is a path that opens your eyes to how things really are. It teaches you to see both the beauty and the pain in the world, and it asks you to keep caring about life, even when it hurts. Solomon lived thousands of years ago, but his story still speaks to us today. Over time, his image has appeared in many forms. In some stories, he is a wise king. In others, he is a master of magic. In some, he is a builder of great temples, both on the outside and inside the human soul. In mystical traditions like Hermeticism, Solomon is not just a person from history. He is a symbol of someone who understands the deep structure of life. He is someone who learns how the universe works and tries to use that knowledge to grow and help others. Before people learned about modern science or psychology, they wrote books about Solomon and his connection to spiritual forces. In Freemasonry, he became the perfect builder, the one who brings order from chaos using sacred patterns. In old books of magic, written in the Middle Ages and later, Solomon is shown as a master magician. He knows how to draw symbols, call spiritual forces, and create tools for transformation. One of these books is called The Key of Solomon. It gives instructions for spiritual rituals, when to do them, what materials to use, what prayers to say, and how to prepare yourself. These were not random guesses. They were part of a system that saw the universe as deeply connected. Another book, The Lesser Key of Solomon, goes even further. It names 72 spiritual beings, each with specific roles and signs. These books say that Solomon once trapped these beings and sealed them with his ring. Today, people still study these texts, not to control the world, but to understand themselves better. These books are not about magic in the way most people think. They are about focus, discipline, and learning to understand your own mind. Every spirit represents something inside the human being. Every ritual is a way of facing your own thoughts and emotions. In Jewish mystical thought, Solomon is seen as holding a kind of hidden knowledge that brings together opposites. His name, Shlomo, is linked to the idea of being whole. He stands at the center, where light and shadow meet. He tries to hold both sides without being broken. In some schools of Kabbalah, Solomon is seen as the righteous person who keeps the world balanced through his inner strength. But even that kind of person carries a weakness. That weakness is the pain that comes from knowing too much. In Islamic mystical teachings, Solomon is a prophet king who commands the elements and speaks with animals. He represents the soul that has learned how to master every part of itself. In early Christian writings, he is seen as someone who had access to spiritual truths, but still made mistakes because he got too caught up in the world. And that is one of the most important lessons of all. Solomon is not just a perfect figure. He is also someone who failed. He stumbled. He lost his way. But that does not make him less powerful. It makes him more real. It shows us that falling down is part of the journey. You cannot know light without knowing darkness. And Solomon lived both experiences fully. Today, his image still appears in many spiritual traditions, teachings, and personal growth systems. But more than anything, Solomon lives in every person who dares to look deeply into life and build something meaningful within themselves. If this story helped you understand something new or made you feel something real, share it with someone else who may be ready to grow too. Because, as Solomon once said, there is a time to be silent and a time to speak. And perhaps this is your time to speak.